28-year-old Tyler Leclerc entered the courtroom surrounded by court officers in an orange jumpsuit with his hands cuffed to his waist. Families of Leclerc's former students filled about half the courtroom, and there were a couple of outbursts. Judge Jessica Siegel updated Leclerc's indictment, which includes criminal sexual acts, sexual abuse, and forcible touching.
Hey guys, Rob here with McDojoLife, and the turd sandwich you just saw in that video clip goes by the name of Tyler Leclerc. Tyler Leclerc was arrested on February 5th of this year after an extensive police investigation revealed sexual abuse of, quote, multiple children over the course of several years. Keep in mind, the police are not guessing about these crimes. It was an extensive investigation that involved multiple units, which included the Troop K Computer Crimes Unit, the Troop K Forensic Investigation Unit, Troop K Community Stabilization Unit, and the Dutchess County Child Advocacy Center. To add to that, according to court documents, each victim provided information pertaining to a course of sexual conduct against them involving the respondent. And to add even more to that, following his arrest, and I quote, the respondent made numerous admissions confirming said conduct to include oral sex, forcible touching, and dissemination of pornographic images to a minor. Respondent made admissions to having each victim perform numerous sex acts on him. So it seems that Tyler Leclerc was not only caught red-handed, but he also just flat out admitted it. And to give you an idea of just how bad this really is, he's being indicted on 42 charges, which include 6 counts of third-degree criminal sexual acts, 1 count of first-degree sexual abuse, 17 counts of forcible touching, and 18 counts of third-degree sexual abuse, which involve 4 victims from March 2021 to February of 2025. You sick. Now, I wish that was the end of the story, and we could just call it a day. Bad guy gets caught, he does his time in jail, we move on. But unfortunately, this is just the tip of the iceberg. You see, Tyler Leclerc was a martial arts instructor at Leclerc Martial Arts. Here's a clip of him being interviewed by a student that is creepy and a little telling.
I'm here at Leclerc's Martial Arts, and I'm going to be asking Master Tyler some questions. First question, when did you start karate?
I started training when I was 3 years old, so 2000, I guess.
Second question, what's your favorite part about teaching?
My favorite part about teaching is probably just having an impact on all the kids, whether it's teaching them new skills or teaching them how to learn better or listen better, or little details at home in school or little details with their martial arts. It's all one and the same, and I really appreciate getting the chance to connect to all the kids. So it's a lot of fun teaching these little guys. Not so little anymore though.
Leclerc Martial Arts is owned by Tyler's father, Robert Patrick Leclerc Sr., who also goes by the name of Pat. But before Robert Leclerc Sr. owned Leclerc Martial Arts, he was an instructor at Southerton Karate owned by Don Southerton. And then after that, an instructor at So's National Karate owned by Henry and Joe So. It was around this time that he met a young teenage girl by the name of Deanna, who he would go on to impregnate not once, but twice. Let's hear her story.
My name is Deanna. And Robert P. Leclerc is a former boyfriend and father of my child.
How did you first meet Robert Leclerc?
I joined, I believe it was Southerton Karate when I was 14 or 15.
And when you first got to the academy, who was your main instructor?
The So's.
And then when were you introduced to Robert Leclerc when you started? He was just an adjacent instructor? Or?
He was an instructor, but I mainly dealt with the owners of the karate school.
When would you say you started getting closer with Robert Leclerc?
Just after 15 and a half.
And what really caused that to happen? Because originally you were under the So's as your main instructors, and then slowly but surely you became closer with Robert. So how did that become?
I had a very strong interest in the martial arts. And Robert was good with what he did. So I gravitated towards him for instruction.
How would you say your relationship started to escalate?
When I was 16, I invited quite a few people from the karate school to my sweet 16 birthday party. And I started to develop some sort of crush maybe. At my age, at 16, I guess that's what it was. And then he kind of gave that back, the interest.
Were you interested at 16 and invited him, or do you think something happened at that party that kind of made you feel a little bit more gravitated towards him?
I think starting from that party, I felt a little more gravitated. Um, he put a lot of attention into me, into my into the classroom. I was the only girl on the fighting team. So that was something special to me.
When would you say that the line as an adult now was crossed then?
I think it happened gradually, where he started showing more and more attention, which kind of drew me in.
Eventually, some line was crossed eventually. And
Yes.
when would you say that moment was?
When we started meeting outside of the karate school, on our own personal time, driving me to and from class. Yeah, and not really going on dates, but just, like I said, to and from class, teaching together.
This was pretty standard. He would drive you from your home or drive you from school.
No, from home.
Your parents, I guess, trusted him at this point.
Yeah. Yeah. They had no reason to doubt that he was kind of only, doing a good deed.
How old would you say he was at this time?
He's 5 years older than me.
So that means he was 21 around that time. So when
Yep.
did things become physical between yourself and Robert Leclerc?
16 and a half, because I did end up pregnant.
So still at 16, you wind up pregnant. Since you were 16 living at home with your parents, he's a 21-year-old at this time, I'm assuming independent. Where would these meetings happen?
In his car.
At this time, were you aware of someone named Renee Williams?
Yes.
And she was who to you, who to Robert Leclerc, to your knowledge at that time?
Just another student at the school.
It seems to my knowledge that they potentially had a relationship during the same time that you had a relationship. Is that correct?
So it started shortly after. So when I ended up pregnant, that was my first pregnancy from Robert. So this happened during my second pregnancy.
You had your first pregnancy before he started seeing Renee Williams.
Yes, to my knowledge.
What happened with the first pregnancy?
My family found out, and they pretty much convinced me that the best thing to do was to have an abortion.
This is something that you followed through with?
Yes.
For the first pregnancy, you were 16 at that time?
16 and a half.
When did the second one happen?
When I was 17.
Okay, so they were pretty much back to back.
Yeah, I feel like being young, getting pregnant, my family not really forcing me, but encouraging me to the best of their ability to end my pregnancy. It was hard. I thought I was in love.
And I'm sure, if I had to guess, I'm sure that that was something he probably tried to perpetuate as well.
He wanted me to keep the baby.
The first one?
Oh, yeah.
What did your parents have to say about that? Did they ever have communication?
Oh, they forbid me to see him. I mean, he drove all the way down to where the abortion happened to beg me not to go through with the abortion.
Sorry to hear that, because I'm sure that that had to be a very rough time. That's tough.
I was in the middle, being pulled in both directions.
It seems like you were still seeing him after this had happened.
Yes, I was kind of sneaking around. My parents still allowed me to go to the karate school, but I was being dropped off, picked up by my parents. But I was sneaking around seeing him, and of course the sweet talk from him kind of encouraged me to continue.
So shortly after that, you find out you're pregnant with another child from Robert Leclerc, and then this time you decided to keep the child.
I did.
So how did that conversation go with your parents?
They were not happy. They really didn't want me to continue to go to the karate school. But at that age, I was not really rebellious, but, I thought I was in love. And they had their own opinion. They tried to convince me that it wasn't what I thought it was. My parents are very, very supportive. Hard times happen. And I think the disconnect that I was starting to have with my parents because of being pregnant again, and the disappointment, I gravitated towards him more.
When did you find out about Renee Williams?
I kind of had a feeling something was going on towards the end of my pregnancy, and it was confirmed after I had my son.
He was having a relationship with yourself at 17 and with Renee, who, to my knowledge, at that time was around 15. And then he also, on top of that, had a pregnant wife.
So his wife, his first wife, had already had a child before we had gotten together. So she was pregnant, sent back to Germany, pregnant, had the baby, sent back to Germany, and I helped raise his first child for the first 2 years of his life.
When did you actually speak first with Renee, and how did you find out?
I remember he had an apartment in the city of Poughkeepsie, and I had showed up one day, and I believe she was there. That kind of confirmed my knowledge that something was going on between them. I had continuously tried to warn her, kind of do the best that I could do to keep her from making the same mistake.
So what happened at that point?
I slowly started pulling away from the relationship that I had with him because of what I've been through, living together, traveling back and forth to school, not really getting the support that I needed. Once he moved into the apartment in Poughkeepsie, and did some unimaginable things to me and my son, I couldn't do it anymore. And I decided to step away and call it quits.
Do you have an example of one of those?
Yeah, I have two that stick out the most. One is when we were living together. I was dropped off at a grocery store and he was supposed to pick me up in the dead of winter, and he never showed up. He left me and my son in the cold, standing outside the grocery store until the wee hours of the night. And I had a deaf stranger drive me home from Highland, New York to Newburgh. That's one. The second one was because I was still trying to continue school and graduate. While he was in his apartment with another woman, he left me sitting outside in my car with my son that had no heat, waiting for him because he was supposed to babysit.
And I'm assuming he was not babysitting, he was with another one.
I had my son with me in the car, waiting for him to come outside so he could take my son so I could go to high school and get my education. And come to find out, he was in the apartment with another woman.
What has his relationship been in terms of raising?
He was around for the first, maybe 60 a year. I had contact with him and his family, but slowly after that, it was just deteriorated. So there is none, and really hasn't been a relationship with the two.
Does he attempt to make contact or speak with him or anything like that?
Never has. But I'm glad he wasn't in the picture, because if he was, God knows what my son would have turned out to be.
Are you still involved in martial arts at all?
No.
No? Do you
So
think
I quit because of my pregnancy. I was kind of shamed at the karate school, and I was told that I was not allowed to come back. So I quit right before my black belt.
Could you dig in a little bit about that? Like, how were you treated in the martial arts facility, and what really caused things to go south there?
The instructors, the SOs, they knew about the relationship that we were having. Didn't really, condone it, nor, say it wasn't right. So they knew what was going on, but once I was pregnant, that was a no-go for them. It wasn't allowed. They didn't want anybody to know that I got pregnant by one of their instructors.
So let me make sure I get this straight. So these adults, grown men, I'm assuming at the time, at least in their 30s or 40s, the So's.
Yep.
They have a 20-something-year-old instructor. They're aware that there's a relationship.
Oh, yeah.
And they allowed that.
Mm-hmm.
But then when you get pregnant, rather than kicking out the instructor for taking clear advantage of his position of power and what seems to be breaking a law at the time, they kicked you out instead of him?
Yes.
That is the most ridiculous shit I have ever heard in my life.
It's very heartbreaking.
I'm going to close on this. If you could go back in time and give 16-year-old you at your birthday party a little piece of advice, what would it be?
Listen to your parents. Listen to your family. They have your best interest at hand.
Now, you would think at that point it can't get much worse, but unfortunately it does. As you heard in Deanna's story, she wasn't the only teenage victim of Robert Leclerc Sr. This next victim not only was younger, but what happened to her actually led to the conviction of Robert Leclerc Sr. Let's hear her story.
My name is Renee Williams, formerly Renee Rothstein, and I run 3 martial arts schools and after-school programs and summer camps in Ocala, Florida.
How long you been in the martial arts industry?
I started training in martial arts in 1991, so like 34 years.
Where did you start training martial arts?
Somebody gave me a flyer at a parade, maybe it was like 4th of July or something like that in 91. And I started training at So's National Karate. I think at the time it was a Southerton Karate in Hyde Park, New York.
How old were you when you started?
I was 11. It was but after the Karate Kid boom.
How long had you been doing martial arts before you met Robert Leclerc?
I want to say, I think he was one of the initial instructors at So's National or Southerton Karate in 91. And then he left for the military. So he was there, he left, and then he came back.
What was your relationship to him when you first got there? What was it like when you initially met him?
I was just a kid in class. I was, just a kid, and he was one of the instructors. And I remember having like a little crush on him, but he left and then he came back, and that's kind of like when it wasn't great.
What happened after he came back?
He left and came back twice. He left and then came back, and I think he was maybe like 21 at the time. He came back with a son, I believe, and then he actually started dating one of the students, and then she was like a teenager and she got pregnant, and then he left again, and then he came back another time. And at that point, I didn't think he was still dating her, but I did know that he had a kid with this friend of mine. So then the So's opened another location in Poughkeepsie, and I was at that location, and he came to that location. So he had come back as an instructor, and that's when he and I became involved with one another. I think he must have been 22 and I was 14.
How did that relationship begin?
I would imagine, somebody actually just asked me about this. I think that he would kind of make jokes that were maybe sexual in nature. And, based on my response to that, I think it kind of opened doors for him to pursue a relationship.
And by relationship, to what capacity do you mean?
I think when it all began when I was 14, but I don't think that we had a sexual relationship until I was 15. I mean, I think that it was probably sexual in nature, but I don't know that we actually had sex until I was 15.
And then how long would you say that this relationship went on?
It was about 2 years.
And then what happened at that 2-year mark?
Well, I think that over the 2 years that I was involved with him, because of my age, it was always like discretion was key. So I was aware, like I would find a card from another girl when I was babysitting his son, or pictures from other women. And so I think that I became aware that there was other people, but he was always telling me that I was crazy. And when I was 16, I was able to drive for myself for the first time. And I remember just finding his address, and I went to his new house, and I was confronted by a woman who told me that she was pregnant. And that actually was Tyler's mom, who is like the second part of this story. And I was 16 at the time. And I think like very quickly, the relationship ended from there. I don't know if it was like exactly right then, but it was within the next couple months that ended.
He did wind up going to court. Tell me what led to that.
So I think I went home when I was 16 and found out somebody was pregnant. And I think I just spilled to my mom. I told her that somebody was pregnant and I was like broken. You know, it was the first person I'd ever had sex with. I think we had been dating since I was 14. And in my mind, I was going to marry him. And so I think I realized at that time that I really was not in a mutual relationship with him. I think I became aware that I was kind of being manipulated a great deal. And my mom was like, I think we just need to go to the police.
What happened once you went to the police?
They actually had me record a couple conversations with him. And then it was so damning because he was so vulgar and sexual in nature that there wasn't really a defense. There was nothing he could say to prove that there was not a relationship of that nature. And so he just pled guilty. And I ended in 1998, but it's just because it takes some time for courts to process.
So were you in the courtroom at that time when this all occurred?
Yeah, actually, I went with Deanna. She came with me because they had had a child together and he was always quite negligent from their son. And so she and I just spoke and kind of compared notes to times that he was probably in a relationship with the both of us. And then there's this new person that was pregnant. And so, yes, I was in the courtroom that day.
What exactly went down to allow him to have his record sealed?
I can't say what the prosecutor and him agreed to. I just know that at the time when I was talking to the police, they were just talking some probation. And I believe that like whoever was working on the case, when he said he wasn't going to be at his studio, and then they went there to check on him and he was there. And that's when they added the 5 years probation. To be honest, I'm not sure that he was even going to get that. So I don't know why they worked it out. I just remember feeling pretty defeated. Like it just didn't seem to really matter. Like he had it sealed. He wasn't supposed to be around children, but the school stayed open. So I don't know how you run a school that's a primarily child-based business and not interact with children. But I moved to Florida shortly after. And I also think that at the time I felt quite, I'm trying to think of the best way to word this. I think a lot of the parents that chose to stay at the school contributed to me feeling like I was the problem, maybe.
You're a martial arts school owner now, right? Do you
Yes.
have any advice for parents out there who might be trying to decide where to put their children to have a good program or a good experience in martial arts?
Oof, that's tough. And I say it's tough because I think that whenever you have groups of children, people that want to hurt children in that way find ways to gain access. So you see it everywhere, like roller skating rinks and martial arts. Like we just had that happen in Florida here with a roller skating coach. So it's a little different where I live because to have an after school program, you can do that and you are exempt from being a childcare facility in Florida, but you have to apply for the exemption. And in order to get the exemption, everybody in your company then has to go through the level 2 background check. So Florida, I think, is maybe a little bit ahead of New York in that way. But I also think that even if you do background checks as a parent, you are only going to find people that have been caught. So I think that you have to just not give someone access to your kids in a way that's not appropriate. So how it happened to me was that the instructors would travel for tournaments and parents didn't always travel. They allowed their kids to go with the instructors. And I would not do that. I would not allow my teenage, adolescent, or even close to adolescent child just go with an instructor and have a sleepover or go out of town. So I think that a little bit of it is just, you can't have blind faith that an adult is going to take care of your child. I don't think it's appropriate to give someone that kind of access to your kid. And I think that you just, even though it's convenient, because once you start to do any sport at like a high level, like travel ball or anything like that, you're really committing to your weekends. I think if you are going to allow your child to get more involved in an activity like that, you're just going to have to accept that your schedule has to also change, because allowing adults to transport your kid out of state in hotels, you're just giving a kind of access that you should not. The thing that I would like to share would be to parents of young women or young men who are in a situation where they have become sexually involved with one of their instructors. I think that at the time, my parents did seek out some counseling, and I'm sure that I was like, I'm fine. I understand. He was a bad guy. I'm a good person. It really took me going through my entire adult experience, and I'm about to be 45 years old, to understand the impact that that had on me. And when I look backwards, and I've done a lot of self-help and personal development and just different counseling and had many mentors in my life, the thing that I can recognize is that when I was 14, that was probably the first time I started making decisions without my parents. It was the most autonomous I'd ever been. And I thought that I knew what I was doing. And obviously at that age, I didn't. But going into my adult years, then because my first decisions that I made without my parents were not good ones, I think I had a very difficult time trusting myself just in decision making. Is this a good person to date? When do you move away from somebody who's not being forthright or treating you with respect? Like just some of that fundamental relationship stuff. And even just like when I'm having a conversation with someone and we don't agree, just simply standing on my own position to say, no, this is how I feel and this is what's right for me. That's always been difficult for me. And it probably took me going through a divorce and looking inward at myself to recognize some of these things and then to ultimately trace it back to, wow, the first time I was ever empowered to decide something for myself, I made poor choices and I got hurt terribly and so clear. And he was telling me I was crazy to think that he wasn't being faithful to me, even though he was sleeping with like everyone. So for anybody whose children are going through this, is not just the sexual trauma that they're going through. You probably need to take some time to address their decision-making skills and reinforce for them that they are able to be their own navigator through life, and that just because someone took advantage of them, it doesn't make them not qualified to guide their own ship. And I would say that that's probably the single most important advice I wish I had gotten back then, and maybe gone through some counseling just specifically about that.
Robert Leclerc Sr. was convicted of third-degree rape on June 20th of 1998, according to Dutchess County Clerk, which anyone can see on dutchessny.gov. In New York, rape in the third degree is a Class E felony, involving sexual intercourse with someone incapable of consent due to factors other than age, or with someone under 17 when the perpetrator is 21 or older. I'm sure after hearing that information that some of you might be wondering how the hell this convicted rapist is still allowed to run martial arts schools. Well, that boils down to a few factors. The first being that his record was sealed, making it difficult for people to get that information. The second being there's no governing body for martial arts and no true regulations for owning a martial arts school. But the third factor is more insidious. You see, there were parents and were students that were around when this happened and chose to turn a blind eye anyway. And for those who showed up after the fact who might not have been aware or heard a little bit about it through the grapevine, they were just told a blatant lie that the age gap wasn't as significant as it truly was. Being told that lie was the case for many students, including Dr. Kimberly Ortiz. Let's check out her story.
My name is Dr. Kimberly Ortiz Hartman. I'm a psychologist and a licensed marriage and family therapist. And I also trained at Leclerc's Martial Arts from the age 14 to 18.
What was your very first memory of being at the Leclerc's?
Actually, I took like a camp somewhere else, and there was like one little stint of karate in it. And I told my parents ever since that I wanted to do karate. And, the truth is not a lot of teenage girls were doing karate at that time. So it wasn't really the cool thing to do. But I just had an idea that I would love it. My uncle was very into it. And so my parents eventually supported it, found a school, and that's when I started.
What was the first time you met Robert Leclerc?
I guess when I started, I don't have like a vivid memory of meeting him, but my mom and I went and we met him, and I took a trial class and I just loved it and continued on from there.
So I guess you became an instructor eventually?
We were encouraged to come as much as possible. That would kind of move you along faster. I started in the children's program because I was, I think, about 14. And because there wasn't anyone close to my age, that was always kind of like a tricky part of it was, should I be in the child's class or should I be in more of the adult class? And so that, kind of that's a part of all this. But yeah, I think I used to go 2 times a week and then it moved up to 3 times a week and just got really involved. I feel like it kind of clicked for me. I really loved it. And then just, pursued it as much as I could. And then I think it wasn't until I became like, I think I was about a red belt when I started to do more of the teaching of the children's classes. And that's kind of when I moved up to the adult class.
Now, at this time, when you had started, Robert Leclerc Sr. had already been a convicted rapist, third-degree rape. And what was the justification there? Because obviously, you're a child, you're being put into a program. I'm assuming that this was not a secret to people at that time. So, what was the justification that you were given, or your parents were given at that time?
Yeah, it's pretty weird to think back as an adult now because I know it was just it was something that was known. And I really can't tell you how it was told to us because I don't recall, but it was a known thing. And it was explained basically that the relationship was consensual. There was only a couple year age difference. I remember hearing something like 17 and 19, that it was a relationship that was consensual. And when it ended, then like charges were pressed. And, really the picture was very painted. Like, he was the victim, he was being taken out of context. It was disclosed because, and I assume it was disclosed because he wasn't allowed to teach the children's classes. So I'm assuming that's why it was disclosed to us. But the way it was portrayed and how everybody at the school talked about it was that there was nothing inappropriate about it. And if anything, he was kind of the victim in the situation. And I'd want to add that the community around him supported that lie. There was a large group of people that had been at the school, knew the situation prior to me, and everybody supported him, which made it, I think as the newcomer on, it seemed more believable, I suppose.
So after you became an instructor, what was life like then? Because obviously you've worked your way up in the ranks. Anybody
Mhm.
out there who's done martial arts knows that there's a built-in hierarchy. And so you're working your way through the ranks, and all of a sudden you made it to an instructor position, which, especially as a teenager, you feel a sense of empowerment. Hey, I'm in charge of stuff now. I've earned my
Mhm.
spot here. So what was that like?
Yeah, I mean, and it was exactly that. There was a great sense of pride in it. I did work really hard. I really loved it. I was a part of the demonstration team, the tournament team. I was there really often. I dedicated so much time to being a part of that community. And it felt great to be able to be an instructor. There was a head instructor at the time, and, him and I, along with some other instructors, taught pretty much all of the children's classes. Robert Leclerc wasn't allowed to teach the children's classes, so he usually wasn't there, or if he was in the office or somewhere else. Um, and then at that point, I had been in the adult classes for a while. So I was, I guess treated as an adult in that way, even though I was obviously a teenager. Um, and it was, yeah, there was a lot of pressure, there was a lot of responsibility, expectations on us to basically be running this program for him. And a lot of, like you talked earlier, the hierarchy really led to just an immense amount of power that he had over us that, I think we all were trying to do the best we could and listen to him and follow what he was, you know, telling us to do in that way.
What were some things that you would say were probably off that maybe were not appropriate that you yourself had witnessed or gone through?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, like I said before, as an adult and a professional now looking back, I can see it all in a different light, right? Like as a teenager, the immense amount of control that he had over us and abuse of power was really inappropriate. And so, the examples would be, kind of punishing us if we weren't there enough. If we had any other commitments, it really wasn't allowed. If I wanted to play another sport, I was punished, treated badly, maybe even like beat up, extra on the fight nights. Like there would be punishments for not doing the things that he wanted you to do. And just an immense amount of control in how we acted, what we did, who we spent time with. I did share with you that I had a relationship when I was there. And, to me, the big thing that stood out was just his total inappropriate involvement in my teenage, 15, 16, 17-year-old relationship. He would want to know what was happening. He'd want to know the time we spent together. He'd want to know if we got into a fight, I would be in trouble. He'd be calling me into his office, yelling at me. I'm a 16-year-old girl in high school, and here's an adult man yelling at me for getting into a fight with my high school boyfriend, right? And telling me all kinds of inappropriate things about this and really just trying to control every step that was happening. And finding out later that that was going on the other way too, telling, my boyfriend at the time how he should be acting and all of this stuff. And so really just over involvement and control of our lives. He would absolutely ask inappropriate questions, such as questions about, my sexual life with my partner at the time, which, I was a teenager and that's just so beyond inappropriate. Just, there was always a sense of sexism in the whole system, which is, and so, I think being the girl, like I was absolutely treated like there was, certain things or, he would make expectations or, the questioning, it would all be pretty inappropriate. And so, at the time it was still pretty feisty, I would say. And I would call him out and tell him that the stuff he was saying was inappropriate. It didn't stop him in any way. But that was always a piece that I had a red flag about, even as a kid. And yeah, I can remember a specific situation of the, underage drinking. And, I would say it took a step past allowing underage drinking, more of like the encouragement and actual effort to, try to get underage kids inebriated.
When you decided to go to college, what was how was that received at the martial arts studio and by Robert Leclerc Sr.?
I remember very intense conversations of him being very, very mad at me and telling me that, even back, telling me not to go to college, also telling me, okay, if you need to go to college, just go locally so you can keep teaching, right? Like there was a lot of control in that way. And, and really like another piece is really like putting people against me. I feel like he really turned like, this, that he's very intense on calling it a family. I'm sure people that are still there are very familiar with him talking about this is our family and how close we are. He's very quick to kick people out of his family. And he would tell me not to go. He would, really berate me about it, like he did with other things. I would be called into his office and he'd be screaming at me, right? I was a kid, and about all these different situations, I would be in the office with him screaming at me. And nobody really stood up for me. No one intervened. Other adults there, like there was no support in that way. And obviously, like I wasn't necessarily running home telling my parents that this was going on because they'd tell me I can't ever go back there. Right. And, thank God for me, I had this really supportive family that was like, you're going to college. This is not an option. Like this is, so I had these, two different families, I guess you could say. My actual family that was telling me like, this is your life. Like you do what you want to do with your life and you're going to college. And then this karate family that was really basically saying we're going to turn our back on you if you leave. And if you leave, then, and that led to other things. I was supposed to get my second degree black belt at that point. I was at a testing that I think I told you he was removed from because he was illegally there. And I was told I couldn't test. And so there were punishments that happened to me because I was making the choice to leave. And eventually I had a really big falling out where I said like, this isn't appropriate. You can't tell people not to live their lives. Like I see what you're doing to these other instructors, the younger ones that are, some of them are still a part of this, and I had a really big blowout with him saying like, what you're doing is wrong. And this is not okay. You can't control people's lives like this. You can't tell young people that they shouldn't have a future. That's absolutely inappropriate. And he basically told me that I was breaking up with the family and how dare I do this to them and all of this. And we had some choice words and I've never spoke to him again.
Anything you'd like to say here at the end? You're more than welcome to. The floor is yours.
Sure. Yeah. I think that my biggest thought and the reason that I really want to be here today is because, yes, I'm a psychologist. I see it from a different perspective, but I'm also a mom in the community. I have two daughters, and I want them to be in every activity that they're interested in being in. And I need it to be safe for them. And the big thing that I really want people to know is that this goes beyond being, you know, beyond rape, beyond sexual abuse. Obviously, that is like the end of the spectrum. That is the worst case scenario for any person, any parent to ever hear. What I want people to know is that there is a continuum. And so if you think that just because those horrible things are not happening to you or your child, that it's all okay and it's safe, that does not mean that this is a safe environment. And I want to encourage people to really look past, is my child being abused or not? And think about this entire culture that we're trying to talk about here, that this intense abuse of power, this intense controlling of children's lives, of the inappropriate stuff that goes on with that, the brainwashing that's really taking place in this community. And you told me yesterday, like, martial arts studios don't need to be like that. I don't have any experience with them not being like that. To me, that's what they were, and that's really sad. And it's really sad that in my mind those things are coupled together when they really shouldn't be. And I know as an adult and a professional that there are good people, and there are good people doing this work. I also know as my 16-year-old self that that's not what I saw. And I want parents and people in our community, because these schools are still operating, to understand that even if your child's not being abused, this is still an unhealthy environment, and an environment that abuses power in that way. And this is something that has happened repeatedly in the same community, sexually assaulting children. If this is continuing to happen in this community, we have to understand that this is not a safe environment, and we need to do something different.
Unfortunately, being manipulative, controlling, and sexually devious are not the only issues Robert Leclerc Sr. seems to have. He apparently was also physically abusive. According to a complaint brought against Robert Leclerc Sr., on September 23, 2015, he physically attacked an instructor by the name of Torres inside his Hyde Park martial arts location. The complaint states that Robert Leclerc Sr. struck Torres in the right cheek and right side of the jaw. Then 5 to 6 minutes later, grabbed Torres by the throat and struck him again in the face. Then 5 to 6 minutes after that, struck Torres in the face again, causing a laceration on his upper lip. That is the most passive-aggressive attack I have ever heard of in my life. But we continue. In a hearing on September 22nd of 2016, Robert Leclerc Sr. pleaded guilty to this, and you can see for yourself in the court transcript. Mr. Leclerc, do you, by your plea of guilty today, admit that on or about September 23, 2015, at approximately 1:00 p.m. in the town of Hyde Park, County of Dutchess, State of New York, did intend to annoy, harass, or harm Andrew Torres? You did subject him to physical contact by either striking, shoving, or pushing Andrew Torres? His answer, yes. But Rob, there's no way it gets worse. It does. He also allowed someone who sexually abused children to be in a position of authority in his kids' classes. This is Charles Bateman, and he was arrested on January 18th of 2024 and eventually convicted for sexually abusing 2 children under the age of 6 years old. January 18th of 2024, he was arrested. Well, that's strange, because here's Charles right here helping out with kids' classes on February 11th of 2024, and here he is again on August 2nd of 2024, helping out with kids' classes along Tyler Leclerc. That's right, 4 months after Charles Bateman was arrested on charges for molesting 2 kids under the age of 6 years old, Robert Leclerc Sr. allowed him access to help teach kids' classes at Leclerc Martial Arts. That is insane. This brings us to February 5th of 2025, the day of Tyler Leclerc's arrest, which we already covered at the beginning of this video. What wasn't covered at the beginning of this video was the aftermath of that arrest. At the time of Tyler Leclerc's arrest, Robert Leclerc Sr. was running 6 martial arts studios throughout New York. Now, you would think, with all of the articles coming out for the public to see about Robert Leclerc's rape conviction, about Tyler Leclerc's 42 charges, and about the fact that Robert Leclerc allowed Charles Bateman to continue to help with kids' classes after he was arrested for child molestation, that the Leclerc family would just close the doors. But unfortunately, that's not the case. Now, some might assume because their website is taken down, These signs are posted on their windows, and all of their Google locations are marked permanently closed, that they're just done. But two communications that they put out internally seem to state otherwise. Take this first one, for example, sent out by Robert Leclerc Sr. himself. We want to let you know that we are staying open. We will be scheduling a day for everyone to come to the Rhinebeck location for a meeting where we'll go over our plan and answer any questions you may have. Thank you for your continued support during this challenging time. We know things are difficult right now, but we will get through this together. If you have any questions, please call us at our Hyde Park location. Also, keep an eye out for a call from us on Monday. Best, Master Robert. As you can see in that communication, he seems to have no plan of actually closing his doors. But he does, however, mention a plan. But what could that plan be? Well, maybe this communication that was sent out by his staff might give us a little insight on what that plan actually is. We know it has been a difficult time for everyone associated with Leclerc's martial arts. We are in the process of rebranding, but it will take us some time. At this point, in the best interests of all our families, we will be closing the Arthur'sburg location and allowing people to attend the school of their choice in Red Oak Mills, Arlington, or Hyde Park effective immediately. If you have any questions at all, please do not hesitate to reach out. We have always prided ourselves on being able to service all of our students in any of our locations. We will be available to answer any questions as of Monday morning, 7:30. Please call our headquarters school with questions or concerns. Sincerely, the staff. Side note, for anyone out there who happens to run a martial arts studio where the owner is a convicted rapist and his son, who was an instructor there, was brought up on 42 different charges against children, you should never use the sentence, "We have always prided ourselves on being able to service all of our students at any of our locations." That is not a good decision in terms of how you use your wording. But I digress. It seems pretty clear that based on those two communications and their own words, that the Leclercs not only do not plan on closing their doors, but are just simply going to rebrand. Oh, and these photos taken on April 1st of the Rhinebeck location don't exactly make the school look like it's closed to me. It seems they're just going to continue to teach anyway. And with martial arts being a fairly unregulated industry, and with there being so many loopholes in our system, there's not much that can be done to stop them. Or is there? I had the opportunity to actually sit down and speak with one parent who had her son in the Leclerc martial arts program. She, along with a group of other people, are spearheading a campaign that might actually bring some change to New York. Let's hear what she had to say.
I'm Christina Vikas. I have a 7-year-old son who was enrolled at Leclerc's in their Arthur'sburg location.
When did you first meet Robert Leclerc Sr.?
Robert Leclerc, I've only met a handful of times. I had, heard of him most of my life growing up in Hyde Park, which is where their main location was. And I was friends with his son, Tyler Leclerc, who has recently been arrested.
So you were friends with Tyler Leclerc growing up?
Yeah, we met in kindergarten about a year after I moved to Hyde Park, and we have just always been friends or at least acquaintances every single year from kindergarten to 12th grade. So he was somebody that I very much trusted when I enrolled my son into his program.
So you knew of Tyler Leclerc, and I guess that's why you chose Leclerc Martial Arts?
That's absolutely why I chose them. It was kind of a no-brainer for me. When I was looking at martial arts programs, I was like, of course I'm going to go with, I only know one person in martial arts, and this is somebody I've known my whole life, so it was a pretty obvious choice to me.
I'm assuming everything went well when you first started at Leclerc's Martial Arts?
Yeah, he was very welcoming to my son and quickly became a role model for my son and almost like a superhero in our house. This was somebody that my son never wanted to disappoint, and he was having, even good behavior at home because he didn't want it to get back to Tyler.
So everything was going well, and
Mhm.
I'm assuming the next part was that you found out about the charges?
Yeah, it was about a day after his arrest that we found out, and very quickly I wanted to discern whether or not my son had been a victim. At that point, we didn't know any of the stats, if the victims were boys, girls, young, a little bit older. So I had to ask him those really uncomfortable questions, whether or not anybody had done anything to him. that made him feel uncomfortable or tried to trick him into doing something he didn't want to do. And he had a lot of questions that, of course, I had to answer in the most appropriate way I can for a child. And, I told him that Tyler had been arrested for doing inappropriate things to children. And at that point, he was just the angriest I've ever seen him in his life. Normally a pretty happy, mellow little guy, um, turned into, this kid who had felt betrayed and angry with somebody that he looked up to so much.
How old was he when he found out?
Just 7.
You said that he became very angry. How did that manifest?
He was instantly angry, and he was also really sad. I mean, he was throwing up about a day later and reverted back into my bedroom. He's still in my room. It's been 2 months. And that's okay. I want to make him feel comfortable. He is feeling unsafe right now because he knows that this is somebody he looked up to so much, and that's been kind of ripped away from him. But as far as anger goes, he's been writing Tyler's name on pieces of paper, ripping them up. He'll just seemingly out of nowhere say, I hope Tyler gets beat up in prison. Um, and I mean, I've never seen him so upset.
When you found out about Tyler Leclerc, I'm assuming you decided that was about the time you were going to pull your son from the program.
Yeah.
But what was the response when you decided to pull your son? How did that go?
My son had already been aware, because of our conversation, and he didn't feel comfortable going at all. Thankfully, we found a new dojo, and he absolutely loves it. He's got some problems with focus right now, you know, because he's missing his friends. He still misses a couple of instructors that he had. Um, yeah, and not everybody was a bad person there, so it is really awful, and he misses them.
It seems like, at least through news reports, that people were having issues getting refunds from the Leclercs.
Yeah, I've also had no luck. I did speak with Robert Leclerc Sr. Back just a couple days after Tyler's arrest, and he told me to give him 15 days and he'd talk to me about a refund. And of course, I haven't heard anything back. I've emailed a few times, called a few times. I've gotten nothing back from anybody over there. Um, and I only know 2 or 3 people that have actually gotten a refund, and that's it.
Once this happened, and obviously your son's very distraught, you kind of didn't kind of let it go. It seems like you've kind of moved forward with doing something about this. Can you kind of describe what you've been working on?
So, there is a Facebook group called No Predators in Kids Spaces. I am co-founder of that Facebook group, along with another resident of Dutchess County named Katie Toohey. And we've pretty much made it our mission to tackle this loophole in the law that allowed Robert Leclerc Sr. to run his program that had, kids in after school programs, busing programs, transportation to and from school, um, summer camps, and just, even kids attending his classes while he was in their presence was wildly inappropriate, and he knew exactly what he was doing when he slipped through that loophole.
Can you describe the loophole?
There is a loophole in New York State Education Law 3001 that does not specify that, people accused and convicted of sexual and predatory crimes against children, um, it allows them to hold these classes for children in certain settings.
Tell me a little bit about what you guys have been able to accomplish so far with your group.
We've been at a legislator meeting. Many of us went to speak and address our concerns to the local chairman and legislators. Um, it's been great to see how bipartisan this issue is being held. You know, Republican, Democrat, everybody's been very supportive. Everybody sees the hypocrisy of this happening and how wrong it is. Um, and we've had a lot of government support in the area locally. It's honestly really touching. We've had so much support. The chairman himself said that we could borrow a conference room if ever we needed to talk as a group, which I thought was an awesome, way to show us support.
What's happening next? What's next on the plate?
Michelle Hinchy has written a bill, and I think we have to see where that goes, and if necessary, keep applying pressure.
What advice would you give to any parent putting their child in a martial arts program?
It's tricky because there's still a loophole in the law. So you just really have to vet and stay aware, stay present. Don't leave your kid alone. It's unfortunately just not the right time to do that with this loophole still open.
Now, up to this point in the story, you've heard a lot of facts about the Leclerc family and from the victims of Robert Leclerc Sr., but we haven't really heard much from their side. Recently, on International Women's Day of all days, Robert Leclerc Sr.'s current wife, Laura Leclerc, put out a statement about the situation. Here's what she had to say. "I will not be small. I will not shy away from the outstanding work I have done alongside my husband as we created one of the most unique and exceptional demo teams in sport karate history. It is out of pure love for what we do and the relationships we build as a result that create greatness. You can either stand by us and our athletes and remember all we have done, or move aside. You can either seek out the truth about the incident that happened back in 1997 and that my husband has already paid for, or continue to believe all the falsehoods that are out there. Tyler will pay for any crimes he committed, and we do not condone any of his behavior. I will always take great pride in Leclerc's martial arts and Team Leclerc. Happy International Women's Day." Well, Laura, I did seek out the truth, and I made sure to lay it all out with receipts included. I even took the time to reach out to Laura and Robert Leclerc Sr. to hear their side of things, and I got no response. So you can't say I didn't try. As far as Laura Leclerc's statement goes, let's see what the women who were abused and taken advantage of by Robert Leclerc Sr. have to say about it.
I don't want her to be representing me as a woman. That is my thought. She knows exactly what has happened between Robert's past and the current situation, and you still continue to stand by a man who has done so many things to hurt so many women. It's disgusting.
Well, the irony right off the bat, Happy International Women's Day. Just disgusting. I don't know how somebody can sit by and support their husband after knowing about crimes that they committed. And I'm also curious how she thinks that she built this quote unquote empire that the Leclercs have. I mean, I think they only got married a couple of years ago. Um, I and just I mean, the worst of it is just ignoring the victims and talking about herself and them like they've done something great when really they've destroyed lives.
Initially, I thought it was really gross, and she's only focusing on their physical skill sets, not their character. And also, when she referred to the falsehoods, I'm like, when I kind of unpacked it a little bit and removed myself a little bit from being the person that was the victim back then, I'm like, she probably believes him. She doesn't know how old I was. She's listening to I mean, he's just a really charming person. So I'm sure that she does think, my understanding is she called some of their instructors and said I was 17 and he was 21. And it's just not true. His birthday is in March 72 and my birthday is in April 1980. So he's always been over 8 years older than me. And I think that initially I was really appalled, and I was like, you're talking about falsehoods. You're not even speaking to the truth. But she may not even know the truth. She's never spoken to me, and I've never interacted with her. People that know him is just so scummy. Like, he's such not a great person. I cannot imagine taking great pride in that name. I hear it and I'm like, ugh. And I not just my personal experience, like knowing Deanna and knowing that she was like a young mom, and it was not like an accidental pregnancy. Like, he wanted her to have a baby. He had a son with this lady in Germany, and he wanted him to have a brother. And he was like very intentional about that with her. And she was young. Like, he derailed her life.
Let's end this with some closing thoughts. Tyler Leclerc seems to have done some horrific things. Horrific things in which he will pay greatly for. But it's undeniable that Tyler Leclerc grew up in an unhealthy environment where behavior like this was either occurring, accepted, or simply ignored. This by no means excuses his behavior in any way, shape, or form. It does, however, show a pattern of poor choices, bad decisions, and at times, criminal behavior that spans over the course of 30 years. Take Don Southerton, for instance. You remember Don, right? He was the owner of the first martial arts studio that we mentioned Robert Leclerc Sr. instructing at. Well, he had 2 liens filed against him from the IRS. The first one being on 6/28/1994 for the amount of $13,489.81, and the other filed on 9/6/1994 for the amount of $7,880.74. Now, while that is fairly minor in the grand scheme of all the things that we've talked about in this story, it does show poor decision-making with at very least his money. Or how about the So family? You remember the So family. It was the second studio that we mentioned Robert Leclerc Sr. instructing at. They were clearly aware that Robert Leclerc Sr., one of their instructors, was having a sexual relationship with an underage student at their martial arts studio and turned a blind eye to it anyway. Well, they turned a blind eye, that is, until she became visibly pregnant. And then rather than kicking him out, the clear issue here, they kicked out their pregnant teenage student. What the is wrong with you? While we're on the subject of the So family, not only did they turn a blind eye to criminal behavior, they participated in it as well. Marlene So, wife of Joe So, spent over a year in prison for filing fake corporate income tax returns in which they underreported approximately $650,000 worth of income for National Martial Arts Academy. To add to that, their son, Michael So, was arrested in April of 2024 for sexually assaulting a 14-year-old student when he was 19 years old. And of course, that brings us right to Robert Leclerc Sr., Tyler's father, his mentor, and his boss, who's done horrific things over the course of Tyler's life. While Tyler Leclerc's decisions and actions are completely horrific and inexcusable, he was surrounded by poor decision makers and criminals his entire life. But the craziest part about all of this is that people paid these people to take classes and to have mentorship. And they didn't call them criminals. They called them sensei and master. This brings us to the question of the day, brought to you by academysafe.org. Please make sure that you vet your martial arts studios. Make sure that they're asking for background checks. Make sure that they're qualified for what they're doing. Check to see if they're Academy Safe certified. The question of the day is a very deep, complicated question that has been around since the dawn of time. Nature versus nurture. Do you believe that people are born bad people, or do you believe that behavior is ingrained through their environment? Let me know what you have to say about this in the comment sections below. As always, thank you all for the likes, comments, shares, subscriptions, memberships. Check out academysafe.org. Keep the martial arts legit.